What is going on, everybody? I hope you are doing well. Welcome to another episode of the Danial Experience. By the way, folks, Journey Self-Awareness exercise is out right now. You can go to Google, type in the Journey Self-Awareness splash space Danial teaches, and it'll come up. Without further ado, folks, this episode is going to be one of those where it's going to progress in complexity the further you listen to. So in the beginning, it'll be pretty light, pretty, easy to kind of follow along, and then it'll get more and more complex and arguably more and more controversial. So the first thing I want to talk about is the show that's been all over everyone's minds, especially if you're a Marvel fan, WandaVision. That's a show that I've really enjoyed, and I really want to talk about it from a psychological perspective and a couple things that they've done really well in that show. Then I want to be answering a question from my friend Lydia about effective studying techniques, time management, keeping up with classes, and how to just really approach the whole school and studying and classes whole thing. And finally, I want to be answering another question from my friend Nick about basically racism with regards to white people. So, as you can already tell, it's gonna get more heated the farther we, keep going in this talk. So to start off, folks, let's talk about WandaVision. Have you seen it? Are you a fan at all? Is that something that you're interested in? Now, I myself, quick disclaimer, I wasn't the biggest Marvel guy. It wasn't until I started to watch one movie and then the next, and two words sum it up perfectly: character development. Man, you want to see a character where they're dynamic, they have certain beliefs and values, and then you see how the events around them change their thoughts and they start acting differently because of it, and then how those characters start to interact with one another, and the production is brilliant, the writing is brilliant, the casting is excellent. So folks, let's talk about WandaVision real quick. Spoilers, if you haven't seen WandaVision, I believe I've seen up to episode 8. I want to say that's the second to last episode. It's really well done show. And if you're a fan of superhero and stuff like that, 100% would recommend for you to check it out. Even if you're not, if you're a fan of those old 1950s, 1960s sitcoms, I would still recommend you check it out just for the excellence in production. I mean, Marvel Studios really went above and beyond trying to recreate that world. So for people who have no idea what I'm talking about, WandaVision is about this witch by the name of Wanda, and it talks about how she got her name, the Scarlet Witch, her and her husband Vision. And basically what this young lady did was, this is all you gotta know. Which again, amazing show, amazing show. Spoilers ahead. There's this girl, she can use magic, and she went through an amazing, a crazy amount of trauma in her life. Unbelievable. We're talking depression, PTSD, and a plethora of other mental disorders that she should have because of this. Anyway, she goes through all this stuff, right? And what does she do? Wanda ends up creating this kind of false reality, right? Because what you saw, I believe it was in episode 8, was you kind of see Wanda as she's growing up and she loses her parents at an early age. Then her brother passes away, and finally she loses her partner who she was very intimate with. So Wanda's got nothing, right? And going through all this trauma, she ends up creating this alternative reality where everything's fine and everything's amazing, and you're back in the 1950s, and where the biggest problem that comes up, it's not the end of the world, right? You're not fighting aliens from a different dimension. No, you're just, you got to cook up a late night dinner because you forgot that, your husband's boss and wife were coming over. You know what I mean? So Wanda basically creates this reality where everything's quote unquote normal, or what she perceived to be normal from what she saw on TV. So Wanda, as a child, she'd look at those 1950s, 60s, 70s kind of sitcoms, and she was like, oh, that's what a regular life is like. The wife stays home, she cooks and cleans, the kids are running around, playing with toys, and then the husband's always gone to work, but nobody has any clue what the guy actually does. And then he comes home, and then it always ends with them sitting on the couch and watching TV. Now, folks, WandaVision is interesting for a plethora of reasons. One, again, I think the writing and production are brilliant. Two, folks, whenever you encounter someone that's gone through a lot of trauma, there's a certain pattern that you see there. The first thing that you'll notice is shock, right? It's this crazy idea, right? Let's say you're like, oh man, me and my dad, we have this fishing trip planned on Saturday, and then he passes away like that. And you're going, I don't understand. We had this trip planned, and we were gonna go do this, and then he had that on his to-do list. I don't get it. So first you're hit by shock. Right afterwards is denial, right? So no, it can't be. No, he was right here. He was right here. And what ends up happening is, right, when all this gets pent up and eventually a person goes towards acceptance, that's when you get feelings like anger and sadness, and they just start to break down, right? So what Wanda has done from a psychology student's perspective is, when she got hit with all that trauma, which is normal, which everyone will do, is they go, okay, I feel so much pain right now. And the reason that it's psychological makes it tough, because you can't see it. You can't see the pain. If you break your leg, we can see it, right? If you break a bone, if you have a cut, right? If there's a tear in your muscle, we can see that. But obviously, like, fMRI scans and all that funky stuff, right? You can see it too, like in your brain sometimes if you've hit like concussions and swelling and things of that nature. But if we're talking about just emotional pain, it's very hard to see. So a person will say, I feel so much overwhelmingly painful. What can I do right now to get myself out of this situation? And I would argue what Wanda does with her magic and creating this kind of false reality for herself is what you and I would do, the majority of people do when they reach for alcohol and drugs. See, alcohol and drugs, they kind of give you this distorted perception of reality, right? They can make the pain go away. Sometimes they just make you forget about everything. Maybe I forget about life and I just stop overthinking and my anxiety goes away and all I think about is me sitting in this chair and the way that my lips are moving and the way that my tongue is moving so I don't bite down on my tongue. Right? This is one of the reasons why people like to engage in alcohol and like to engage in drugs. And again, I'm not saying that's the only reason why people do it, but it gets super, super popular whenever people are going through a rough time. Because it does make you feel better momentarily. That's the important part. Now, the problem is if you're a witch and you go through trauma, well, you can do a plethora of other things. And in this case, creating a false reality. Because we know that when you go through horrible things in your life, it is much easier to kind of change the narrative so you don't have to accept your current circumstances, right? As opposed to just saying, no, it's okay, it's fine. No, it was just a bad dream, it's fine, everything's okay. Everything is okay. And that's genuinely how people act when they reach towards alcohol, when they reach towards drugs. So in the show, WandaVision, you see that there's several instances where you see that kind of beautiful fantasy that Wanda had created for herself. It starts to fall apart, right? I believe it's the very first episode where Wanda and Vision are sitting across Vision's boss and Vision's wife. And it's just one part where Vision's boss, he starts choking on something and the boss's wife looks at Wanda and she's just saying, please stop, like, please stop. Please stop. And she's saying it over and over again. It turns kind of into this like kind of creepy, borderline, almost like horror movie thing of like Wanda, you're keeping everybody here hostage, right? And apparently they are kind of consciously aware of it, but you're forcing them to kind of engage in this world that you've created. All to please you and to make psychological sense of the new world around you. Because you can't go out there. Because out there in the world, it's full of death and suffering and hate. And why? Why would you want to expose yourself to something like that? So you put yourself in a little bubble. And that bubble is called Westview, I believe. That's the little village or that's the little town that she's inhabited and completely taken over and made it her own. Now, from a strength-based perspective, if I was to take a social worker or a counselor or a psychologist, one way that they would look at this, and again, correlating to a person who would turn to drugs and alcohol to help heal their pain, they'd say, all right, listen, you're going through an excruciating amount of pain. What you're doing right now is you're trying to fix it. You're trying to help yourself. You're trying to solve the problem. And for that, I want to pat you on the back. Seriously, if there was a counselor with Wanda, and she would sit her down, and if she would have the strength-based approach, she would say, hey, listen, I'm proud of you for trying to fix this problem, for trying to stop this pain that you are suffering. It's a good thing because it tells us that you want to get better, which is amazing. But then what they'd say is, okay, listen, clearly what you're doing now, her with the magic and the reality, and regular people with drugs and alcohol, they say, listen, let's substitute this drug and alcohol for something else. Because the problem is drugs and alcohol are only a temporary solution. The same way that this reality world is just a temporary solution for Wanda. Like, this can't go on forever, can it? Eventually people are going to find out. Eventually something has to go wrong. Here's what's really, really important. Folks, when you have someone who's dependent on alcohol and who's dependent on drugs to kind of keep the pain away, when you have someone like Wanda who's made this reality where everything's perfect, the moment you say, Wanda, stop, she only hears, let's invite all the pain back in. And let's invite all the evil and all the suffering and all the terrible nights back in. One of the worst things that you can do to someone who's suffering from trauma or is going through something really, really hard is you take away the only thing that is numbing their pain, and that's it. You don't do anything else. So if you've just gone through something horrific and you're drinking hardcore, and I take that alcohol away and then I walk away, it's like, well, I just took away the only thing that was stopping you from jumping over the edge. That was the only thing that was keeping you from going crazy. So I'm not saying you should allow people to drink, you should allow her to have her world, but a counselor would say, Wanda, we gotta substitute that with something else. Again, now I don't know if that means Wanda goes to therapy, she starts going to yoga classes, she has a personal fitness trainer and, he works out with her 3 times a week. I don't know what that would be for her, but for anyone suffering from trauma, it is very, very normal to see them reach for different things to try to numb the pain. Unfortunately, a lot of the time it is temporary. This is a very fascinating fact too. I've said it time and time again. If you've got haunting thoughts, and this is so valuable for anyone who's been emotionally scarred or has things that bother them, if you want to forget them completely, if you want to completely get out of your system and never overthink again, this is what you have to do. The literature has confirmed that, believe it or not, when people suppress, and this is something that Freud had said 100 years ago, when you suppress something and you put it in your subconscious, it's like throwing something in the storage room and closing the door. What you're doing is you think I don't want to think about it. But actually what you're doing is you're never getting rid of it. You're kind of just shoving it in a storage room, but it's still there. It still exists. You're just pretending it doesn't. That's why it keeps popping up. It's like you got a cut. But instead of going and doing what needs to be done, getting a Band-Aid, like a bad cut, you just kind of put your sleeve over it. And you go, there's no cut. I don't see one. The cut's not gone just because you don't see it immediately. Right? You're hiding it. Right? You don't want yourself to see it, so you can play this kind of psychological mind game with yourself. And the literature has shown that if you truly want to forget about something, you truly want to get it out of your system, you first, as I know as terrible as it sounds, you have to get something from your subconscious and you have to focus on it so much that you bring it into your consciousness and then you think about it. You think about every little detail, emotionally, everything. You think about it nonstop. You're like, Daniel, this doesn't make any sense. I'm trying to stop thinking. What would I think on purpose? Because the only way to stop thinking about something, as crazy as this sounds, is you don't run away from the thought. You run towards it. You fully embrace it. And when you embrace it and you think about it consciously, and whether that be, then you talk to someone about it. Then you make a video like this. You don't post it online, obviously, but you just make a video where you can explain yourself. Or you write it down. That is the only way that you can get it out of your system. And that's not, hey guys, that's what I think will help. That is what the current literature states now. That's what Sigmund Freud, founder of the psychoanalytic theory, said 100 years ago, and it still stands to this day. If you have emotional scarring, you do not create a false reality around you like Wanda Maximoff, or you don't cling to drugs and alcohol, but you face your fear. You face the death, the misery, and the suffering, and you will cry, and it will be fucking terrible. But that is the only way to get better. The ball is in your court. Do you want to live through the suffering now, or put it away somewhere and have to face it 5 months from now, a year from now, 5 years, 10 years from now? I trust you. You're a competent individual. In my opinion, what I do, I want to get it out of the way. It's the healthier thing to do, and I think it's the right thing to do. Damn, dude, that was deep and that was dark. Man, have you realized how, dark this episode is sometimes? Goodness. And I was trying to start off lighthearted. Oh, man. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. But yeah, folks, WandaVision, if you haven't been watching it, I'm very, very curious as to what your reason is. Because if you're like, oh, it's just superhero and whatever, I understand. But again, if you are a fan of that sitcom, I would recommend checking out episode 1. I'm going to be totally honest with you, folks. I think it's really nice just for the production, how they've done it, the certain camera angles, the lines, the writing was work of gold. And if you have seen WandaVision, I'm curious what your thoughts are on it. Are you pleased with the series? Are you happy? Are you excited? What do you think is going to happen in episode 9? And yeah, man, it's good stuff. It is some good stuff. I'd recommend it. All right, folks. And with that, we are going to jump on to our next topic. So this is a question from one of my friends, Lydia. And Lydia said, hey, Daniel, can you make a video about, just the world of studying, the world of time management, keeping up with your classes, setting goals and all that good stuff, which was a fantastic question. And thank you very much for it, Lydia, because this is something that you can just break down, for hours and hours of content, because there's so many different ways that you can go about it. Now, I'm not going to talk about all of it in this one because this can go on for a very long time. I will talk about a little bit, but I'll definitely revisit this topic in the future. The first thing that I'd say when you're looking at how to study effectively and how to make time management is this. Make sure that you are a good employer and a good employee. Daniel, what the heck does that mean? This is what this means. if you're your own boss, you want to be a good boss, right? You want to make sure that you are getting your assignments done on time. You want to make sure that you're not failing any of your classes. You want to make sure that you are basically excelling in your classes if you can. On the other side, you don't want to work yourself to death, right? You don't want to burden yourself with having to do a plethora of things in one day, which is unrealistic to get done. And then shout at yourself and feel guilty and feel, like you're not smart enough to go to school or to be at university or college because you can't do, 10 assignments in a day, which wasn't even possible to begin with. So first of all, be aware of how much work you're assigning yourself. And if you're being either one, too lenient and saying, I'll just do it a day before it's due, or if you're someone like me and you maybe put too much work on yourself and then you fail to do that work and then you shame yourself for failing to do that work. So first thing is, realize your relationship with work. Are you too lenient? Are you too hardworking? You want to find that balance in the middle. Tip number 2, I'd say, when looking at time management, two of the best things that you can do for yourself are 1, work in advance, and 2, be consistent about it. So I'm an anti-procrastinator. I hate having to do something the night before. I feel so much unnecessary stress and it sucks. And I know it's not as good as it can be because it's rushed. If I'm writing a paper, if I'm studying for a test, there's nothing more that I love than just picking away at that thing one day at a time, maybe a week in advance, 2 weeks in advance, because that way you can really sleep on it, come back, revise it, look over it, right? And if you're studying, you're really giving yourself time to consolidate that new information, right? And then you look at it again, and it's just so much better for understanding, especially abstract concepts. So if you can do it in advance, it's amazing. You will never, ever be stressed. And my motto is this: if you can do a little bit every day, that will save you from ever having to do like 4 hours. 4 hours in a night, 6 hours in a night, or something crazy like that. And secondly, consistency. It's super, super important that you're consistent with the schedule. So if you're like, hey, I'll just do it, 6 hours the night before, it's like, well, is this sustainable, right, for the next 6 months? Is this sustainable for the next 2, 3, 4 years of your undergrad? If not, maybe that's not the best way to approach it. If you can develop a routine, which is fair, meaning, you're not working till 10 p.m., you're not working till 1 a.m., but also you're not, just saying, well, it's 2 p.m., I'm just going to stop working now, right? You make exceptions. Why? Because you're the boss, you set the schedule. However, you're not going to die over the schedule, right? So if you say, let's say, I'm going to stop working at 6 p.m., but you have a little bit of more work left to do, you got to judge yourself, right? You got to use your own discretion and go, okay, you know what? Maybe I can push till 6:30. It won't kill me. Or you also got to say, you know what? I worked exceptionally hard today. If I said 6, I'm going to say 6 today. I'm going to relax. And I'll work maybe a little bit harder tomorrow. So it's really, really important using discretion and thinking about your routine and how you want to approach things. Tip number 3, when you want to study, one of the best things that you can do is write down to-do lists of sorts. Now, to-do lists are really good because you can see everything in front of you. I myself, I've always been a visual person. So let's say if I've got 4 classes, I will write down what is the earliest thing that's due. So let's say one thing is due 2 days away, and the next thing is due 4 days away, and the next thing is due the next week after that, right? So I write it down in order, and the due dates are beside everything. And when you've done that, you'll never find yourself in a position where you'll forget something. Like, oh man, I forgot an assignment, right? You'll always be on top of everything. I know this is very hard for students to do, especially, again, you got 4 or 5 classes, right? Maybe you got, a reading for this one, you got a paper for that one, a test coming up for this one. So if you can write and do things, I think that'd be an absolutely amazing way to go at it. If you just want to journal things down, if you want to write something up on Google Docs, Microsoft Word, whatever floats your goat, that is a really good way to go at it. Tip number 4, when you're making to-do lists, a big problem that I think that people run into is they'll say something like study for my psych stats exam. First of all, what the hell does that even mean, man? Right? When you make a goal that is ambiguous, so it's not specific, it's really hard to monitor and say, did I accomplish that goal or not? So get really specific with your goal, right? What does that mean, right? Let's say you got 3 chapters in your upcoming exam. Does that mean you have to study all 3 chapters in a day? Do you mean you want to study 1 chapter in a day? What does that study the chapter mean? Let's even go more specific. Does that mean you're just going to review PowerPoint slides? Does that mean you're going to look up extra material on YouTube? Does that mean you're going to do a study session for that specific chapter? So when you're setting goals, so now you've got your to-do list, right? You're treating yourself like a good employee and like a good employer. You're doing things in advance. You are consistent. Not only do you have a to-do list, but now you're really specific about it. It's not just finish my psych homework, but what does that even mean? Finish, this worksheet, read from page 250 to 260 for today. Right? When you get really, really specific, it allows you to reflect, and then you can actually mark, oh, did I achieve this goal and did I not achieve this goal? And then when you're able to do that, you can take a step back and go, well, why? Right? Was the goal, too ambitious? Maybe it was too big of a goal, it wasn't realistic. Or maybe, I just goofed off. I procrastinated a little bit too much. That's on me. I need to work a little bit harder next time, make sure that I get it in. I need to be a little bit more focused. So those would be some of my top tips. Again, this was a phenomenal question. I will definitely come back to just different aspects of it, right? Because again, you can make a whole podcast episode just about time management, just about goals, just setting goals, how to stay motivated. And the very last thing that I'll say on this is just, again, right, if you work throughout the entire day and if you just do classes, you will feel a lack of autonomy. And this is my final word on this. And the lack of autonomy, I just mean you feel like you weren't able to decide what you wanted to do that day. And when that happens, it really doesn't feel good because you feel like you lost the day, you feel like a day was stolen from you, you might get angry, you might get bitter. Speaking of my own experience, there's been days where I've literally done homework from like 11 a.m. till 8, 9 p.m. And afterwards, I'm pretty bitter about it because I'm like, great, I just lost a day. I could have gone out on a walk, I could have watched TV. And it's not even a specific activity, but it's just that loss of freedom and that freedom of choice. Like, I would have been happy to stare at a wall for 5 minutes as long as it was my choice, right? But the moment you start getting into, especially some classes that you don't fully appreciate, that you feel like you're just kind of taking for the sake of taking, man, like you're just like, why am I even taking this class? And that's one reason that you can get low on motivation. So those were a couple of my tips with respects to, studying effectively and a really good, healthy psychological way to approach the whole school framework. Again, thank you for the question. If any other folks have questions about psychology or things of this nature, please do not hesitate to send me a DM on Instagram. Send me an email at psychologyteachings@gmail.com or really any of the other social platforms that you like. All right, folks. We got one more question from my buddy Nick. So Nick says, Daniel, is racism towards white people real? No. There's different ways you can approach this. So Nick was like, hey man, basically I got this DM from someone and we were talking back and forth. And this person told him, they're like, hey man, you can't be racist towards a white person. And Nick was like, what? Really? Are you sure? And he wanted my thoughts. So Nick, thank you very much for the question, man. So when we want to look at racism towards white people, now, here's where things get crazy. Whenever I do a discussion like this, it's really important to get a definition because oftentimes I might have a definition of my head of racism. You have a definition of racism in your head. And what ends up happening is if I start making claims, I will say something about what you think that you don't actually think and vice versa. So there are two definitions of racism that are important to talk about. Number one, and I really should have looked this up. I really should have Googled this, but I'm going off the top of my head, right? Racism is anything in my mind that I thought that you judge someone based on their race and their ethnicity, and you discriminate them on those grounds as opposed to anything else, as opposed to the merits of their character. Hey Kevin, hey Daniel, did I get hired as your assistant producer for the Daniel Teaches Experience? No, Kevin, I'm sorry. Oh, can I ask why? Yeah, man, I don't work with black people. Right? So what I'm doing here is I'm not talking about, you're ill-experienced, which again, what I'd say is I'd make something up and they'd go, oh, you're not the right candidate. And let's say I'm a racist person, right? I'm not going to tell him that because then he might go and sue me or something. But, right, what I do there is essentially what I'm doing is I'm canceling you when I'm denying you this opportunity based on your race, based on the color of your skin. It has nothing to do with your professionalism or your experience or your skills or anything else you bring to the table, right? That's racist. You'd agree that that's racist. Now, there's another form of racism, and this is what most people refer to when they say you can't be racist towards a white person. And this definition of racism, I would say it's come up, it's pretty recent. And this idea is of systemic racism. Now, systemic racism is all about this idea of, in layman's terms, it's this. Chances are the people at the top of these corporations, so the managers, right, the head executives, the producers at banks, at businesses, educational systems, are white people. Because white people are on top, they hold the power, right? You have the system. The system is in your hands. You can decide who you want to allocate certain resources to, right? For example, chances are you might be a white dude who's responsible for giving out loans, let's say for a house, or let's say, just a really established position in the educational system, they're mostly white guys. That doesn't mean there aren't black people, that doesn't mean there aren't, Mexicans or Iranians or Turkish people or anything like that. But it's just saying the majority of them, if we're talking about North America, Canada and America, are white people. Because they're white people, they kind of hold this power in their hands. And what a lot of them do is they will selfishly keep that power to themselves and to other people who are white. Meaning, if you're a black person, and let's say you apply for a job position to go be a professor, or you apply for a mortgage for your house, or, insurance, whatever it may be, a white guy has the possibility of saying, like, no, you don't qualify, based on the fact that you are black, based on the fact that you're not white. Now, he can't outright say that, but the argument is from systemic racism that, and please, if you're listening to this, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's that the white people hold the power, and thus, race plays a role, right? It's favoritism, right? It's if you are anything other than white and you're on the come up, it is very hard to go up against a system that is based on the patriarchy. So if you're a man, you've won the lottery, and if you're white, you've won the lottery. The system's in your favor, you're privileged. It's going to be easier for you to move up. And a huge weakness of this argument is it kind of looks like they just dismiss competence. Like competence is out the door. Like, oh, you're a white man? Dude, you're totally going to get the job then, for sure. So again, I just want to present that argument. That's not necessarily my view, but I have taken a sociology course, and I had a graduate student, so a student on her way to either get her master's or PhD, and in class she said, guys, it's impossible to be racist to white people. And someone said, why? She said, well, because the systems in place, so the systems of society, healthcare, education, workplace, they're run by white people. And you'll never hear a white person not favoring other white people. Or favoring a black person above a white person in that sense. That was her argument. Now, there's several ways you can approach this one, right? So now we've got the two definitions, right? We've got the individual who can be racist to another individual, and you've got systemic racism. If me and my friend Kevin, and Kevin's a black guy, and we're about to enter a restaurant, at the top it says, no blacks allowed, that's racist. I think we can all agree that's racist. If me and my friend Rick approach a restaurant, and at the top it says, no white people allowed, I would think that's also racist. It's literally the exact same thing. Take out white, put in black. Take out, black, put in Asian, put in Middle Eastern, right? It's racist. Now, the part where it becomes interesting is when you look at a place systemically. Now, again, I can't speak on America. I'll say this. Out of the over 10 years that I've lived in Canada, I am extremely grateful to have never faced one instance of racism. Never. Not once. Nothing about me and my parents being from Iran and me having this Iranian heritage and speaking Farsi. Never. Not once, and that's amazing. And I'm grateful for that. Again, I can't speak for everywhere. I don't know what it's like. I can only tell you about my experience. Now, systemic racism would be, I go and I try to, again, get a job somewhere. And due to me not being born in Canada, right, due to my Middle Eastern background, I would be denied a job opportunity, right? Or I'd be denied a certain opportunity based on something that has nothing to do with the merits of my character, right? Based on something that has nothing to do with me and my skills and my knowledge, right? That would be systemic racism. So to give you an example of what that would look like, my father, when he was around my age, he was going to school in Bonn, in the university in Germany. And there's this one instance where he's writing this exam, he feels really good about it, he submits it, and then he gets the results back, and it turns out he failed. He goes, that's interesting. He goes to the prof's office hours, he's like, hey, I felt really confident about this exam, I'd love to go over it and just kind of see what I got wrong. And I swear to God, you're not gonna believe me when I tell you this. The prof pulls out his exam, puts it on the table, it's got a big F on the front. He flips it open, he begins to remark my dad's exam. And he remarks it, and then he flips it back to the front, he crosses out the F, and he puts a giant B on the front. And my dad's thinking, how did I just go from an F to a B? Folks, profs make mistakes. They put a question in, it's a lousy question, but to fail, to get less than 49%, to get a B, that's a huge jump. And the professor looks my dad in the eyes, I swear to God, and he says, in our program, we've got too many non-Germans as it is. We've got too many foreigners. So now, when I see a name that's a foreigner name, I automatically mark it as a fail. Think about that for a second. Is that not literally what I was just saying, right? Basing it off of something that you cannot control. Something that is not in your hands. It is, right? Now you'd say, well, damn, that's just an individual. My friends, I've got 100 stories that are very similar to that, but that's not the point. The point is targeting someone based on something that is not in your hands, right? Based on your skin color, based on your ethnicity. Can you be racist towards white people? It all depends on your definition. There was a book that blew up not too long ago. It was like oh God, what was it? Something about white fragility, about white people being fragile. And the lady did this, and she was kind of, I don't know, to applaud her like business sense or to get mad at her, but she was like this: white people are really fragile when it comes to racism. All white people are racist. And then when white people would be like, the hell I am, like, I'm not racist. And she'd be like, see, gotcha, you are fragile. It's like, well, when you make those crazy statements, right, and we have two different definitions of what racism is, like, obviously, you know, you're gonna have people bickering back and forth with one another. Coca-Cola just has a training, right? A training came out, it was all over social media. They have a training that was called, Try to Be Less White. Now, you see the problem with that, right? If you go by that first definition of racism that I said, that sounds super racist. Try to be less white. What the hell, man? If you came to my work and looked at me in the face and said, hey, man, you should try to be less Persian. You should try to be less Iranian. It's not going to end well for you, man. It's not going to end well for you. If you heard that exact same thing, hey, man, you should try to be less black. Excuse me? You heard me. You should try to be less black. Does that not sound super racist? But again, I think it was more of like a marketing ploy. I think that's why they chose that motto, because they wanted people to capture their attention. So, you know, whatever, right? Maybe it got the job done. But essentially what they mean is what they're saying, hey, you know, be less white. That means be less oppressive, be less arrogant, be less, you know, be a little more culturally sensitive, right? Don't be so entitled. Don't be so privileged. The problem with that is that you are assuming that everybody who's white is, oh, that's interesting too. Okay, check this out, because I just had this thought, right? Because I was going to finish my thought to say, well, the problem with that is you're assuming that everybody who's white is also arrogant. Everybody who's white is also oppressive. Everybody who's white is also, right? Everybody falls in that category, so you're generalizing, right? It's like, no, man, I got white friends. They're not racist. But what happens is, I was just going to say, there are a lot of white people, man, who don't appear to be privileged, meaning they're in those kind of, you know, lower class neighborhoods. They don't make a lot of money. They don't have a great life. They don't have a good family surrounding. You know, the government's not giving them loans anytime soon, and they're not doing well. So to be white does not, I was going to say to be white does not mean that you are privileged. Doesn't necessarily mean, because I've seen a lot of white people down on their luck. Now, if you're going back to Germany and my dad's story, and where he was studying, 110%. 100%. Oh yeah. If you tell me, yo man, who has the better chances of, you know, succeeding? A guy who's German in that town, and this was many, many years ago, in that city, or a guy who's not German? A guy who's an immigrant, a guy who's a Middle Eastern? I'd say a German, 100%. I'd say the system is on your side, from the amount of stories that I've heard. Yeah, there is systemic racism. Now, if you want to say, now again, that's just one city in one country, right? When people say things like, is America systemically racist? Like all of America? Like every state? Including California? You know, it becomes tough. So can you be racist towards white people? It depends on your definition. I think you can, if you go back to that first one, right? That idea of you go up to a restaurant with your friend, no whites allowed. Dude, what the hell? You're discriminating someone based on color. Why would you do that? You know, you would think that at 2021, right, we know the impact that has on people. And I would like to think that we've matured and that we're past that. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but I would like to think that collectively we realize that statements such as saying, hey, you know, try to be less black, or try to be less Asian, or try to be less white, like, is that okay to say? What do you think, my friends? What do you think? Is racism towards white people real, in your opinion? And if you agree with me, I'm interested if you have any supporting points. And if you disagree with me, if you think, hey man, no dude, I think systemic racism is the bigger racism, it's the one that is more evident today. And no, by that standard, you can't be racist towards white people. I'm interested to hear what your supporting points are. thank you very much for listening, folks. This was a lot. I know this was a lot of different variables in this episode. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you have a marvelous rest of your day, and take care of yourselves, folks. Bye-bye.